You can't control what the future holds, but you can take control of your investments with principle. Whether your goal is to enjoy a comfortable retirement or to secure your financial legacy for future generations. After all, your future and aspirations are worth investing in. That's why we offer a wide range of fund options that gives you global and local exposure for better returns. With more than 142 years of global investment experience at your fingertips, you can take full advantage of opportunities to build your wealth. And we make it easier for you to manage your investments with our enhanced digital solutions. Now you can easily buy, redeem and switch your investments at your own convenience with our easy-to-use online investment portal. Never miss the right opportunities to invest with cash or iInvest. As you build your legacy and aspirations, we will be by your side to help you secure the future for you and your loved ones. Start taking control of your investments with principle today.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us in our second Kopi Chat session. My name is Farah and together with me I have Jonathan Lau.
Hello.
And Shan, our portfolio manager.
Hello.
So if you think that this Kopi Chat session is beneficial for your friends, do tag them in their comments, yeah? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Kopi. So John, tell us a little bit about your Kopi habit.
Okay, my Kopi habits, right? So it's a bit unhealthy. So I drink about, I would say 3 cups of coffee a day. So 1 in the morning before work and 2 when I get into office. I have to have 2 cups of coffee before I kickstart my day. So that's very unhealthy.
Oh, is there a limit?
Yeah, 3 is my limit.
What about you, Shan?
Yes, I do drink coffee and I like iced mocha. And I like iced mocha shaken and stir.
So that's ice
Shaken.
mocha lah, literally ice mocha.
Shaken and stirred.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So in tonight's discussion, we're gonna talk about seeking and investment opportunities in ASEAN, the old and new. So, Shan, so here's a question. Equities market has been volatile of late. How has ASEAN equities market performed this year?
Right, so market has not been easy this year, and we have seen a lot of uncertainties. We have rising inflation. We have a pretty aggressive rate hike cycle by the Fed in the US. And we have the unexpected geopolitical tension. And lastly, more recently, we have the recession risk in the US and Europe. So as a result, the equities markets globally has been rather weak this year. But if you notice, the ASEAN equities market has been a bright spot. It has outperformed global equities market and also the Asia equities market. And we see opportunities in ASEAN both in the shorter term and also for the longer term.
Okay, so before we go into the sort of long-term opportunities, right? So what are the opportunities in ASEAN market in the near term?
Right, so there are several key catalysts for ASEAN in the nearer term. So firstly, I would say it is the reopening from COVID and the subsequent recovery in terms of domestic economy. As you know, the vaccination rates in ASEAN are already fairly high, and the mobility restrictions have been eased across ASEAN in the last 6 months or so. So we have seen a lot of more traffic on the road, in the malls, for example, and this will benefit sectors such as the consumer and the banking sectors. Now, the next step of reopening would be cross-border travel, and therefore the second catalyst would be the recovery of tourism. You might know that the tourism was an important part of ASEAN economy in the past, before COVID. So for example, Thailand used to have about 10% of GDP derived from tourism. And recently, Thailand has eased their entry requirements, and they have seen a pickup in terms of tourist arrivals.
So I think for Thailand is one of the, I would say, most visited place for Malaysians, right? And I believe you guys are looking forward to go back to Thailand as well.
Boleh lah kita plan.
Yeah, boleh. Sometime in October maybe.
Yeah, so coming to the third point for ASEAN catalyst is that in ASEAN, there are also a number of producers and exporters of various commodities. We have oil and gas, we have coal for the energy related. We also have palm oil for soft commodities. And for base metals, we have nickel, copper, and aluminium. Now, these are interesting in the environment of high commodity prices. Now, the other point to make is that the valuations in ASEAN equities is still fairly attractive. I think one way to see it is that the ASEAN equities market index is still trading at a level below pre-COVID back in 2019. At the same time, the ASEAN equities also offer an attractive dividend yield of more than 3.5%. So we see ASEAN in the nearer term offers opportunities in reopening, in the recovery of domestic economy, in tourism. And these high commodity prices will be a positive to certain segments in the market, while the valuation is still attractive. Now, beyond all these opportunities in so-called old economy sector, we believe ASEAN market has evolved. It is now presenting us another set of new long-term opportunities in new areas.
Okay. So the next question is, before touching on other long-term opportunities in ASEAN, so what are the sectors that are likely to benefit from the current environment of high inflation, elevated commodity prices, and rising interest rates?
So I think one point to highlight is that recently some of the commodity prices have corrected somewhat due to the fear of recession in the US and Europe. But yes, the prices are still fairly high compared to a year ago. And the way to look at this is that high inflation and rising commodity prices and rising interest rates are interconnected.
So wait, before you continue on to the next part, right? I mean, I guess we see a lot of topics online about high inflation in the recent news, especially on social media as well. So like, I guess maybe some of our viewers would like to know like what causes high inflation?
Right. When we say high inflation, we typically refer to the rise of prices at which we consumers pay as we consume goods and services. Now, for this region in ASEAN, I would say the rise of commodity prices is a key reason of high inflation. And the rise of commodity prices can be due to several factors. So number one, we had COVID disruption to production and labor supply. Number two, we have the recovery of demand after reopening. And number three, the underinvestment in certain areas like oil and gas production and coal mining due to ESG initiatives. And lastly, the unexpected geopolitical tension. Now, so back to the question, how do you position ourselves in this environment? So one way is to have exposure to commodities through the commodities producers. On this front, we are very selective. So we prefer those with tightening supply-demand balances. Number two, those with strong production volume growth. And number three, as usual, those with attractive valuations. Now, the second approach is to have an indirect but less volatile exposure to commodities. So what I mean here is to have exposure to those domestic recovery names in countries that are net exporters of commodities, such as the Indonesia and Malaysia. So the idea is quite simple. So in the end, these high commodity prices will be a benefit to the economy as a whole through the taxes and subsidies to buffer inflation pressure. And this is the reason why inflation in Malaysia and Indonesia are still fairly low compared to the other countries. And we see this as a buffer to the domestic reopening place.
Right.
Now, the other point to make is that we also can have exposure to banks. Banks will have improving net interest margin from rising interest rates. And to highlight that, the caveat is this will work as long as the rate hike by central bank is gradual, so that it will not disrupt the economic recovery. Now, last point to make. From bottom-up perspective, we always focus on companies with strong pricing powers, those that can pass on rising costs to customers.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say here is that our positioning is always formed through a very rigorous investment process, covering different perspectives of risk, from top-down and from bottom-up perspectives.
Right. So going back to our topic today, right? So seeking long-term opportunities among the old and the new in ASEAN. So you mentioned about the opportunities in the old economy sectors such as consumer, banks, and also commodities. But what are the so-called new opportunities?
Yes, this is a very important question, and the starting point for ASEAN, always remember that we have a young demographic, and this forms the foundation of long-term growth in consumption, in credit, and also opportunities in manufacturing. So from the manufacturing perspective, our labor cost in ASEAN is still cheaper than, say, China. So coupled with the supply chain diversification effort by the multinational companies, ASEAN has seen a lot of inflows for FDIs into manufacturing. So case in point would be Vietnam. Vietnam has seen FDIs into, for example, electronics and textile manufacturing for export.
Okay.
So we see a lot of long-term domestic growth opportunities in Vietnam, where Vietnam is growing their domestic economy through export. And this is actually a very typical growth model for emerging market countries, like what happened to China in the past. Now, apart from Vietnam, we also have a number of smaller but very enterprising listed companies of tech and EMS, and they are typically located in Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore. And they are participating in the areas such as the semiconductor and electric vehicles for long-term growth. I think the most important point here is that through the COVID pandemic in the last 2 years, we have seen a number of listing of internet companies from e-commerce, from fintech, and also from the food delivery.
Because I think demand has spiked, right? Definitely.
More options for
more
online
options for us.
shopping.
Yeah, and also more choices to shop around for food.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, if you recall, in the past, ASEAN market was seen as lacking these so-called new economic companies. So I would say the listing of these successful internet companies in ASEAN is probably the most important structural change to the ASEAN public equities market structure in the last 10 years.
Okay.
And you might be aware that in the recent months, these high-growth, high-valuation companies, they have seen headwinds from the rotation away from work from home to reopening. And number two, headwind from rising interest rates, where it is resetting the valuation of certain companies with weak cash flow. But bear in mind that the ASEAN is still seeing the rise of digital penetration from a low base, lower than the US and China. So we see a long runway for growth in these ASEAN tech companies. And we are actively looking out for opportunities in these areas where the valuation has come to a more reasonable levels compared to, say, 6 months or a year ago.
Okay. So basically, there is an abundance of opportunities in ASEAN. So how do you position to capture all these opportunities?
I think there are two parts to this question. Firstly, in terms of investment approach perspective, we are adopting the barbell approach of cyclical and growth.
Okay.
So on one hand, we like the cyclical and reopening stocks in the sectors such as the tourism, the consumer, and the banking sectors. So here we like quality companies with, number one, the recovery opportunities coming from reopening. Number two, resilient end demand in the face of rising inflation. And number three, strong balance sheet in the face of rising interest rate. Now, on the other hand, we continue to like the long-term prospects of Vietnam, tech companies, internet companies in ASEAN. But here, since late last year, we have made the timely decision to focus on quality growth companies at reasonable valuations. Now, the second part to this question is, in terms of investment strategy perspective, by now you will understand that the ASEAN market has evolved. It is offering diversified opportunities in cyclical stocks, in growth stocks, and also not to forget high dividend yield stocks. So earlier I gave a long lecture on how we position in the face of rising inflation and rising interest rate. So just for illustration, in the event the market conditions shift to a phase where we have easing inflation and slowing growth, this high dividend yield stock in ASEAN would be interesting. So the point is that with all these diversified opportunities, we think the investment strategy for ASEAN that will do well is absolute return strategy, because this absolute return strategy would allow us to do dynamic allocation through different market conditions for consistent outperformance over the long term.
Okay. I think we have few comments already.
Yeah.
So do you wanna?
Yeah, can.
Okay.
So, guess the first comment is China is reopening. So, how shall we allocate equities investment between China market and ASEAN market?
Right. I would say China is refining their COVID policy, and hopefully over time, the mobility restriction in China will be eased, and therefore their economy will be recovering and growing again. And we see this China reopening and economic recovery as a positive to the regional economies, including ASEAN. So one way to look at this is in terms of the ASEAN tourism. So if you recall, Chinese tourists used to be a meaningful part of the tourist arrivals in ASEAN. So if and when China eases further their cross-border travel requirements, we should expect a meaningful boost to the ASEAN tourism.
Okay.
Now the second point is China is also a major trading partner with ASEAN. So obviously as China economy is recovering, we will see a recovery in export-import between ASEAN and China. So that would potentially help offsetting any spillover impact from the recession risk in the US and Europe. So that's from the fundamental economic perspective. From fund flow perspective, there could be some fund flow rotating into China markets. And in the event there's a profit taking in quality companies in ASEAN, we see that as a good buying opportunity.
Okay. I think we can take another
Yeah, we
comment,
can take another question, yeah.
Okay, so there are many countries in ASEAN, and as you mentioned earlier, the opportunities are exciting yet diverse. How do you manage the diversity of ASEAN market?
Right, this is a very good question. So we did have a number of countries in ASEAN. So say from the north, we have Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And these are the key investment markets for ASEAN public equities. I would say these countries, they provide the diversity of opportunities, which is a good match to the absolute return strategy I mentioned before, where we can do dynamic allocation by country, by sector, and by stock through different market conditions. Now, I will also highlight that we, Principal Asset Management, we have a very strong investment capability in ASEAN. So apart from ASEAN team and Malaysia team in Kuala Lumpur, we also have regional offices in Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia. And our Thai office even have a Vietnamese analyst helping us to cover the Vietnam market. So we have a very strong on-the-ground feel for ASEAN to help us to do bottom-up stock picking. For example, to identify companies with quality management and also improving ESG. Now, on top of that, we also have collaboration with our Asia team in Singapore, with our global team in the US. So we have access to macro insights to help us to do top-down allocation.
Okay.
And the synergy of this investment platform help us to be early in identifying fundamental changes.
Right.
This is actually part of our investment philosophy of the house. So in summary, I think the diversity opportunities in ASEAN actually plays into our investment strength of our company. And they will allow us to execute our investment process. For example, the absolute return strategy for ASEAN.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess that brings us to the last question, right, that we can actually take. So Shan, any last sort of closing points or summary that you want to make to our audience? Maybe you can address that.
Yeah, sure. So I hope there are two key takeaways for today. So number one, we believe ASEAN equities have evolved. It is now offering us diversified yet quality opportunities in old economy and new economy sectors. And we, Principal Asset Management, have the people, the process, and the capability to capture all these exciting opportunities, whether it's in shorter term or longer term. And secondly, it's always a good practice for the audience, for investors to understand their own risk profile, and to invest with sufficient diversification. And we believe ASEAN equities will be playing a major long-term role in a diversified investment portfolio allocation.
Right. So, thank you very much for that insights, Shan. So, those who like to take the opportunity to invest with us online can do so by exploring our online investment portal, which we recently enhanced, right?
Yes.
So, through our online investment portal, you can actually invest using cash or EPF savings as well. And there's probably over 50 funds that's available to invest online. So today we have a special promotion for the Facebook Live audience. So if you make a minimum investment of RM 500 ringgit or 1,000 ringgit using EPF savings, you would receive RM 50 ringgit touch and go e-wallet reload pin. So the steps on how to do it and the T&C, everything will be linked into the comments below. So please do check it out. Yes, down here. So any last words, Farah?
Yeah, if you need any assistance with investment, you can always reach out to our financial consultants.
Right.
I guess we're at the end of our session for tonight. Don't forget to follow our Facebook for more investment tips. Yeah, so we'll see you again.
Yeah. So
next round.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see everyone in
Yes.
our next Facebook Live session. So
Right.
thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much,
See you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.